Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 9, Episode 4. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our special guest on this episode is a retail leader we've been hoping to have on the show since the beginning, 9 seasons ago. Neil Blumenthal, CEO, Warby Parker.
We do a little bit of making the sausage here. We do make lists every season for people we want to try to get on the show. And sometimes we are lucky right away. Sometimes they never return our calls. And other times it just takes a while. But yeah, I think Warby Parker, as we'll talk about, kind of the top tier of the so-called disruptor or digitally native vertical brand. So great conversation.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And it was great seeing you in Dallas, my friend. I've become quite fond of Texas and Texans, though I must apologize to the patrons of Central Market on Preston Road as I cleared them out of the amazing Duke's mayonnaise. That's something I bring back each and every time. So sorry for all those people who are following me up the aisle.
One quick thing I want to ask everybody before we get into the news and our interview is reviews are very important, and we can tell by the number of excellent reviews we have on Apple that many of you are listening, but you have not yet reviewed. So take this time to go give us that 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast. And the other thing you can do that would really help us is if you like our episode, which of course you're going to, I mean, they're all good, forward on an episode to 5 of your friends that you think might find it interesting or at least entertaining.
Now, before we get to our interview with Neil, as you said, let's dive into the week's most important retail news brought to you by Scale, the world's fastest growing enterprise commerce platform. Learn more about their solutions at scale.com. That's SCAYLE.com. All right, well, the big news reverberating really across the industry was the change of leadership at Nike. Talk about that. You know the business well, and we talk about it often. What do you think precipitated the change, and what's your perspective on how much of a difference it's going to make moving forward?
Well, first, the news is, if people haven't heard, that Nike CEO John Donahoe is out. Elliot Hill is back. Now, Elliot was the head of consumer and marketplace, which is a very big piece of the whole Nike business globally. He retired, I think about 4 years ago. So he's coming back. The word on the street is that Nike employees are very excited about that. Donahoe's had a pretty challenging tenure. He's not a retail pro, really, or an experienced retail guy. He spent most of his career as a consultant at Bain. Then he spent a number of years at eBay. You know, there's been just anybody who's been following the retail news more broadly or listening to the podcast, Nike's had quite a bit of challenges over the past couple of years. So I think in a lot of respect, it's not really a shock, maybe a bit of a surprise with Elliot Hill coming back. I'll talk in a second about what I think might be different. But the issues, the one that a lot of people point to is that Nike went too far too fast on DTC. I know I've mentioned this before. I think that's a little bit overplayed. They definitely could have gone at a more measured pace. They also got some bad luck because of what happened with COVID, or they kind of misread COVID as well, because I think that gave them confidence to perhaps be more aggressive about pulling back from wholesale. And I think as we look at that, they definitely, as I said, went too far too fast. But if you actually look at the wholesale business at Nike, you know, when you hear all these people say, wow, you know, they bailed on wholesale. Wholesale at Nike in 2024 grew compared to 2023 and 2022. So this idea that they bailed on wholesale is just completely wrong.
Facts are stubborn things, as you say. Facts are stubborn things.
Having said that, it has not gone as well as they planned, for sure. Some of that bad luck, some of that they're not responding as quickly as they needed to some of the changes. China has been a big problem for them, but there's also been a lot of executional issues. And I think it's ultimately, because you could say, well, okay, DTC, you can kind of understand some of the things that were not of their doing necessarily, even though perhaps they could have responded more quickly. But a lot of missteps, I think you could definitely put on management. They cut a lot of product lines too aggressively, lots of issues with inventory management that go beyond the supply chain disruption that lots of people, of course, faced. A lack of innovation. They really created some opportunities for both kind of streetwear brands, athleisure brands, and brands like On and Hoka and New Balance to gain share, and kind of lost that cool factor as well. So they're going to be going from more of an analytical strategy sort of guy to somebody who really has Nike DNA in his blood, much more of a product innovation guy. I've met Elliot briefly when I was out at Nike a number of years ago, but I don't know him personally. So it would be interesting to watch. But I would say both Wall Street and the folks at Nike seem to be pretty excited about it. So it's going to be an exciting story to watch next year.
Let's move on to supply chain. So something that Canadians have been dealing with for 18 months. We've got a port strike right now in Vancouver. We've got a threatened one next week in Montreal. The U.S. is dealing with a potential port strike that could wreak havoc October 1st. I mean, it already is wreaking havoc because I was looking at NRF numbers and retailers have been bringing forward inventories for months, trying to make sure they don't get caught up by this. But the deadline is approaching. The imports are surging, and this could be the beginning of something bigger and a whole different element to the supply chain.
Well, this is a difficult story to talk about because by the time most people hear it, it will have likely happened. But if, in fact, the strike does happen, this, yes, could be very significant. To your point, a lot of retailers have been scrambling because this has been on the horizon for months to try to work around this. And, of course, this is the time where there's so many shipments going in to support the holiday season. So that's difficult. So when you look back, the Port of Los Angeles has seen 60% year-over-year growth in imports in July. So people trying to get stuff in. Similar kind of story with vehicles coming across the U.S.-Mexico border. So I guess it remains to be seen how successfully retailers have been able to mitigate the potential damage. So if the strike is short-lived, they probably have been able to massage their way around many of the issues. But if it were to extend for a significant amount of time, and there's only so much you can do to make up for that steady stream, and then you also probably, again, if the strike is prolonged, there's probably going to be some real excess costs that will be hitting the bottom line in the fourth quarter.
A quick follow-on to last week about Target's early start to the holiday. Walmart and Amazon seem to be following suit. Now, I talk about that, but I also want to understand what's the advantage other than, is it just, I'm going to get that sale first? Because this is probably not going to lift overall sales, right?
Oh, I think there's no chance it will materially move overall sales. I think there's this general belief that people are only going to spend so much over the next few months for the holidays, and there's a first mover advantage. Of course, if everybody starts moving earlier and earlier, that first mover advantage goes out the door. So essentially what has happened, as we've seen steadily happen for many, many years, is the holiday keeps moving earlier. So we talked about Target last week, kicking things off early. Amazon has moved their Prime Day up 2 days to October 8th compared to last year. Walmart made an announcement about some of the promotions they're going to be doing, but the headline on that was they're going to start even earlier than they ever had. So they'll be starting. Here's a huge coincidence. Do you remember I just said Amazon Prime Day, October 8th? Yeah. Walmart's going to launch on, ready for it, October 8th. I know that is very shocking. So yeah, it's just the race to the bottom.
Yeah. As you and Seth would say, the problem is you might win. Let's talk about Kmart. So it's funny when I saw this story. Kmart's been gone in Canada for literally decades, and I didn't even think there was any stores left, but apparently there are. But it looks like they're about to close some.
Yeah, attention Kmart shoppers, time to say bye-bye finally. This has certainly been a long time in the making. I'm with you. It's hard to understand, both with Sears and with Kmart, which folks will know. Well, many folks will know I worked at Sears many, many years ago, and Sears and Kmart were together essentially for many years, and that ended badly. But yes, there's still some vestiges apparently, and their final full-line U.S. store, which happens to be in Bridgehampton, New York, will close on October 20th. They still will have a smaller store in Miami and outposts in Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now, it's very hard for me to work out how you could keep even a dozen stores or 50 stores like this going for any length of time. So anyway, end of an era. The blue light special is going out. Just for a quick historical context, when Sears and Kmart merged way back in 2005, Kmart had 1,400 stores, while Sears had almost 900. So Turns out things.
It's really an epic collapse, right? I mean, we've spoken about it often, but it's not to be taken lightly when business starts to get the momentum starts to turn against you, because man, these were big companies and big retailers. Now they're just gone, or they're in Guam, I guess. Which is
that's right. Yes, which might be the museum of Kmart.
You're relegated to Guam. You got a problem. Let's move to some quick hits on earnings. Let's start with Costco.
Well, we of course talked about Walmart and Amazon's earnings. And one of the points I made back then were really just how strong the big two continued to be, and overall the concentration of success among the big three. So now we've heard from the third in the big three, which is Costco. Another great quarter. 5.4% comp, well above industry average. Very strong earnings growth. So I think we're just seeing more of the flight to value for sure, but also those that have a really powerful value proposition and executing it well, continuing to grow market share. On the not so exciting side, just to mention two other big companies that reported this past week, H&M, which would be more in the value, affordable fashion, fast fashion category, had more or less flat sales. But the other thing, which wasn't so awesome, was that they continue to have a lot of margin pressure, which most of the analysts pointed to pressure both from their direct fellow Spanish fast fashion company Zara, but also folks like Shein. And H&M, I think, a year ago or so, it said that they were targeting a 10% operating margin. And they basically said, maybe not so much. That looks like it's not going to happen anytime soon. Yeah. So that's not great. And then Five Below, this is sort of interesting. We haven't talked a lot about Five Below. And for folks outside the United States, Five Below has been one of the fastest growing retailers for several years now, also in the kind of, I guess you'd say $5 store category. They had overall sales growth because they continue to open a lot of stores, but their comparable sales decreased by almost 6%. So that's a pretty terrible number. So again, as we've talked about with the dollar store guys, you really see some of the value retailers like Costco, like TJ Maxx, doing very, very well. But anyone that's not really well positioned and firing on all cylinders seems to be losing pretty significant market share.
I was struck with our conversation with Simeon last episode about the discussion about Shein around, he said, well, we're trying to figure out where those sales are coming from. And I guess this might be one indicator, right? That there's being pressure put on, the weaker of the fast fashion, H&M. Would you think that correlates together? Is that a fence post or a signpost for it?
Oh, I think it's definitely coming from somewhere, but I think Simeon's point is there's also got to be some folks that just buy an incremental thing because it's so cheap. I think we just haven't seen any great data as to the relative proportion, but certainly we've got to be seeing some impact on more or less the direct competitors. It's just hard to work out how significant it is, but absolutely, I think it's a factor.
So Andy Jassy, when he first took over Amazon, speaking of Amazon, he hit the pause button on Amazon Fresh. They had stores that they had built. They just said, let's hold on. We don't think we got it right. I think they kind of went heavily down the tech side, and they've kind of recalibrated. And now they've now got 50 stores, and they make a big deal out of it, which made me laugh. And I think it did to you as well. It's like, woo, 50 stores, big deal, right? Like an Albertsons or a Kroger would have 50 stores in a neighborhood, for God's sake.
Yeah, I tried to, I had the same reaction. I mean, I guess you could say for sure Amazon is really trying to make this work because they have been at it for a while. And as you mentioned, they've had several different iterations of this. But yeah, 50 stores is really nothing in the grocery world, particularly since they're spread out. Like having 50 stores in just, say, Chicago and Dallas, that would be... Yeah.
Good regional player then. Yeah, you'd be a good regional player.
But the other thing I tried to calculate was I took how many stores Kroger and Albertsons have, which is like they both have, I think, around 1,400, something like that, and what the average square footage is, which the average square footage of both of those stores is considerably bigger than an Amazon Fresh store. And anyway, this is a very rough estimate, but I would say that Amazon Fresh has roughly 1% of the square footage that either Kroger or Albertsons would have. So yes, not material, but obviously they're going to keep working at it, but they are certainly not approaching escape velocity on this concept as of now, or I would say anytime in the next couple of years.
Let's go to the other end of the scale. It's talking about 50 years of affordable fashion from Primark. We toured the Primark flagship location when we were in Barcelona a couple of years ago. Talk about your perspective around Primark. What a growth story and an international retailer in the U.S. and expanding.
Well, it's certainly an interesting story. I had actually forgotten they've been around so long because I think often when we think about some of the fast fashion guys, it seems like they've really exploded on the scene in the last 10 years or so. But yeah, Primark, starting from their original store in Derby a long time ago, now is up to 450 stores across 17 countries and have almost $12 billion in annual sales. So very significant global retailer. A couple things I'll just mention quickly. They've been pretty reluctant to get into e-commerce more broadly, but they now are introducing click and collect services. So we'll see what that portends for them. But also they're making a big push, continue to make a big push in the U.S. And if folks are interested in that, we did interview their president of the U.S., Kevin Tulip. So we'll put a link in the show notes if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But I think a lot of folks in the U.S. and in other countries are seeing Primark continue to grow. Now, we don't know very much about their relative performance, so we just, we know more about H&M and Zara and a bunch of others, not so much about Primark's relative performance because they are part of a bigger conglomerate. But congratulations to them. And check out that interview with Kevin. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on the news brought to you again by Scale. Let's now get to our interview with Neil from Warby Parker.
Neil, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. We're so excited to have you on. Where do we find you today?
I'm in my headquarters here in New York in Soho.
I am. We share a few things. I did spend quite a lot of time in New York, and I also, when I was checking your background out, discovered that we both went to Tufts University. But,
go Jumbos.
Go Jumbos. But I was just a little bit ahead of you, just a few years. But it's nice to see a fellow Tufts grad do okay with themselves. It makes us older graduates very, very proud. But in any event, enough about that. We have so much we want to talk to you. Big fans of Warby Parker. But before we kind of just jump in, maybe you could just give us a little bit about how you ended up where you are today, a little bit about your personal, professional journey, whether you always wanted to be an entrepreneur, that kind of thing. And then we'll talk more about the brand and where you guys are going. Sure.
Well, I definitely wouldn't have predicted that I'd run a lifestyle brand or an optical company in particular. I grew up in New York City, went to Tufts, as we were discussing, really to study international relations. I had always been passionate about trying to do good in the world. And I thought that one of the ways to do that would be to help countries get along and to help resolve deadly conflicts, wars per se, so we could focus on the big issues like health and education. And I say that because after sort of graduating from Tufts, studying international relations, I then did some graduate coursework on conflict resolution and international mediation, worked at a think tank for a little bit to come up with policies to resolve deadly conflict, kind of realized that the policy world wasn't for me, and somebody who is entrepreneurial and, likes operating. I met an eye doctor named Jordan Caslow, who sort of exposed to me that there's about 1 billion people around the world that don't have access to glasses and need them. And I thought that was crazy. Glasses were invented 800 years ago, right? So we're failing as a species if we can't, provide glasses to people in need. And he had this idea to train low-income women in areas where people are living on less than $4 a day to start their own businesses, giving vision screenings and selling affordable glasses to help solve this issue. And it was a social entrepreneur model where people were incentivized to help people get glasses so they could see and, earn a livelihood. And I thought that made a lot of sense. So I ended up spending 5 years running the nonprofit that he started, and creating programs in over 40 countries in places like El Salvador and Ghana and India and Bangladesh. And in doing so, I learned about sort of the power of a pair of glasses to transform someone's life. But I also learned a little bit about the industry. And I would visit the factories where I was sourcing glasses for people living on less than $4 a day. And 10 feet away on production lines with the same equipment were some of the biggest names in fashion. So it was clear that what it costs to manufacture glasses didn't necessarily justify the high prices that you'd see in the U.S. and, on Madison Avenue in New York, per se. But after 5 years running this nonprofit, I went to business school. I went to Wharton to get my MBA, and thought that I was going to go work maybe in management consulting. I actually had an offer to work at McKinsey.
I made that mistake, but I recovered quickly. So it sounds like you did too.
You were Bain, right? You were Bain, right?
Booz Allen.
Booz Allen.
Yeah.
I feel like it's great training. You certainly learn a lot. And these companies have such smart people working at them.
Is that where you met your co-founder at Wharton? Is that right?
Yeah. So at Wharton, and MBA programs have a great ability to foster friendships really quickly. Pretty much most MBAs are type A folks, so they're very eager to meet other folks, and became fast friends with Jeff Rader, Andy Hunt, and Dave Gilboa. Dave was complaining about losing an $800 pair of glasses in the seat pocket of an airplane before school, and how he had just purchased this iPhone. This was in 2008, and how the iPhone could do all these magical things, yet, this pair of glasses cost more. Jeff similarly needed to sort of replace the pair of glasses that he had, but was waiting to do so because glasses were so expensive. Andy sort of posited the question, why isn't anybody selling glasses online? Because this was a period when Zappos was gaining attention for selling sneakers online, and Blue Nile for selling jewelry online, right? Categories people didn't think could be sold online.
It's such an interesting origin story, because we often find that there's this intersection of the personal and the professional when we talk to entrepreneurs. So this is where it came together for you. You said, well, we can make eyeglasses more accessible. I'm very familiar with the brand, love it as well. I've had many pairs, lost one or two, and I think that's good for the business too, in a side roundabout
Indeed.
roundabout way. But let's talk for those. I mean, not everybody's familiar perhaps with the business from a scale and a scope and a size, your online eyeglasses, but talk a little bit about the business model and where you are at today with stores and reach and countries and all that great stuff.
Sure. So the whole premise of Warby Parker is to provide vision for all, and we mean that literally and figuratively. Literally, how do we provide the tools to enable people to see? And figuratively, how do we serve as an example of a company that does well and does good in the world? And hopefully we inspire other entrepreneurs and other executives to run their business in a similar fashion. So we sell glasses, and now we also have expanded into contacts and provide eye care through primarily comprehensive eye exams. But our eyewear is a fraction of what it would cost elsewhere. So $95 instead of, $400 or $500.
Right.
And that starting price at $95 includes prescription lenses that are impact resistant, that are thin, that have, all the coatings, anti-reflective, anti-scratch. And for every pair of glasses we sell, we distribute one to someone in need. And we've now distributed over 15 million pairs of glasses to people around the world, and even here in the U.S. We started online, but we've opened stores. We now have roughly 270 stores across the U.S. and in Canada.
And so that was a big evolution for you, right? I mean, moving from a pure play online, how did it come up that you wanted to have physical stores? Or was that always part of the kind of the plan of some way, shape, or another?
The strategy was always have direct relationships with our customers, because if we were designing our eyewear, if we were producing it and we were selling it direct to the customer, then we could effectively sell it at wholesale prices, right? Because we weren't wholesaling our product to a retailer who was then marking it up 3 to 5 times. So those direct relationships was always sort of paramount to the business model. Now, because we saw this opportunity in e-commerce, and when we started, less than 1% of glasses were sold online. And we thought that selling online was the best way to reach customers, and was also going to be the least capital intensive, right? We were starting this business as graduate students. We actually started it with $120,000. We each put in $30,000 each. And that's the capital that we needed to start Warby Parker.
I'm curious, obviously, and we want to talk a little bit more in a couple of minutes about where you're going and some of the new horizons you might be looking at. But as you think about how retail disruptors, putting you kind of broadly in that category, or DNVBs, or any of the terminology that gets thrown around, there's been quite an evolution there. I think part of what Michael talked about was, and I've talked about this pretty openly. I think we both know Andy Dunn. I remember meeting with Andy early in the Bonobos days and asking when he was going to open stores, and he told me, looking at me kind of sadly, as if I didn't have any clue about retail, he said, we're never opening stores. And of course, they ended up opening a few. So I'm curious, what was it about the market that led people to originally believe that big brands could be built online? What's been the importance of physical retail, and just kind of just generally how you've seen the disruptor model evolve, particularly for you, but maybe a little bit more broadly for people in the audience that might be studying the space or be in somewhat similar sort of situations?
I think there was this appeal of new business models, of innovation, that drove a lot of people to start their businesses online. There was certainly the practical aspect of, was this less capital intensive and less risky? Right? You could build a website for far cheaper than you could build out a physical store, especially back in the, 2006, 7, 2008, 2009, and the early 2010s. So if you think about reducing risk while you're starting a business, right, signing a 10 to 15 year lease and spending a bunch of money to build out a physical space is quite intimidating. When we launched Warby Parker in 2010, this was before Facebook monetized. So we were able to get a lot of organic traffic, a lot of attention by people posting on social media, kind of like the way social media was supposed to work, where your friends share information that's interesting and novel and relevant to you, as opposed to it being fully controlled by algorithms. So like when we launched, right, it was novel that we were selling glasses online because most people hadn't done that before. It was novel that we were charging $95, including prescription lenses, instead of $400 or $500. It was novel that we were distributing a pair of glasses for every pair that we sold. So there was virality in that as people shared those stories with others, and we were able to grow organically pretty quickly. What started to happen is Facebook and other social networks started to introduce advertising and optimized for advertising as they needed to, because they're media businesses. And suddenly folks that were online had to pay more to acquire customers. So often people forget, what's a great advantage of physical stores is that they're accessible to customers, right? And their customer acquisition tools in their own right? People see a storefront, they learn about a brand, they walk in, they're shopping for other products at different stores, and they walk by your store, and it's that storefront's a big billboard. A lot of folks, I think, thought that they could, bypass these physical stores. We were never dogmatic. We never ever said, we're never going to open up stores. Again, the business model was just about having direct relationships with our customers, because that's how we were going to have lower prices. It was also how we were going to get feedback. If we have the best customer data, if we're interacting with our customers every single day, we could get feedback, and we could share that feedback with our eyewear design team. We could share it with our merchants. We could share it with our tech teams. We could share it with operations, with with our customer service teams, and we could continue to optimize and get better every single day. Certainly, we could move faster than, folks that were just retailers or just wholesalers.
Sure. So when you think about the business today and what makes you remarkable and distinctive, I mean, obviously there's a ton of competition, not only folks that have more or less copied aspects of what you originally innovated, but some very, very big players. Now have a huge amount of your business coming from physical stores. You're in a lot of the same malls or streetscapes or what have you that the competition is. How would you describe how the business has evolved to stay so successful and to position you for growth going ahead?
Sure. So I'd characterize us as an omni-channel retailer, right? We want to engage with customers however they want to engage, whether that's through our apps or through a browser on our website or in our, 270, stores. To your point, we didn't initially think we were going to open up stores, but a funny thing happened when we launched. We were featured in Vogue and GQ, and that was very deliberate. We, pitched, the best men's fashion book, GQ, the best women's book, Vogue, because we wanted to establish our credibility as a lifestyle brand, as Warby Parker, as credible sort of eyewear fashion brand. And the company took off like a rocket ship. We hit our first year sales targets in 3 weeks, sold out of our top 15 styles in 4 weeks. It was, we had a wait list of 10,000 people. I mean, it was sort of crazy. But what we had to do is we had to suspend our home try-on program. So one of the things that was also novel about our business online was that you could select 5 pairs of glasses. We ship it to you at home for free. And then if there was a pair that you liked, we would put in the prescription lenses and send it to you. Well, because, word got out and so many orders came in, we ran out of our home try-on inventory, so had to suspend the program for a little bit. And people started calling saying, hey, can we come to your office to try on glasses? And at the time, we were working out of my apartment, and we invited people to come in to
what's going on over
apartment. Which was crazy. Like, we literally moved the dining room table to put glasses on it. We moved a mirror. We had people, checking out on my co-founder Dave's laptop. Originally, we just invited 5 people to come in to my apartment, thinking that, like, if this is just too awkward and too bizarre of a customer experience, at least we'd only damage the brand with those 5 people. But what we found was that it was super interesting for them. When do you get a chance to sort of peek behind the curtain of a brand, especially a startup? And like, literally, they'd walk into my apartment, be super confused, see like 4 people squished on my couch that were trying to, process orders and respond to customer emails. They'd be like, what is this? How does this work? But one of those 5 people was a resident, was trained to be a doctor at the hospital at the University of Pennsylvania. Again, we were full-time students at Wharton at the time. He was in scrubs, and he came in. We built a rapport. A couple days later, we started to see all these orders come in with folks that had email addresses from the hospital at the University of Pennsylvania. So that gave us confidence to be like, oh my God, like, maybe there's
something there, huh?
Yeah, that it's working. And, people are telling other people about it, so they must be happy. So when we opened our first office, we deliberately chose a location that was easily accessible. So it was on Union Square in Manhattan on 16th Street and Union Square West. So you could get to it by subway. You're right by the sort of Fifth Avenue Flatiron retail corridor. And we dedicated a portion of the office to a store, to a showroom. And suddenly we were on track to do $3 million of sales out of our office. And that gave us the confidence to then do pop-up stores, which gave us the confidence to then, sign some longer-term leases and build some permanent stores.
And from that humble beginning, so to speak, you're now, do you have a target in mind? Like we've heard, I'm not sure if it's directly from yourselves or kind of a 900 number. Like, do you have a target in mind of where you want to be? And I know you have stores here in Canada, so do you talk about that for a little bit? What's your objective to grow that store network?
Yeah, so there's over 45,000 optical shops in the U.S. alone. So this is a massive market. There's certainly a lot of need out there. A few years ago, we hired a third party to do a study on, how many stores could we open at similar levels of productivity that we currently have. And the target paybacks for our stores are 20 months. Target four-wall margins are 35%. So great retail metrics. And they came back and said you could have over 900 stores at similar productivity measures. So we think we have a long runway ahead of us.
Could you just maybe quickly, you kind of touched on this, but now that you've got so many stores and now you've been in business quite a number of years, talk about the interplay between digital and physical. I believe I heard, or maybe it was Dave, talk about how your your e-commerce sales go up quite a lot when you open physical stores. But could you just talk a little bit about how you think about that? And I guess that gets back to really being a sort of channel agnostic retailer in some respects.
Yeah. Philosophically, we just want people to buy from us because we're providing great value and great customer experiences. We're agnostic on what channel they do that. And our job is to deliver great experiences that they can choose from. And we found that consumers shop the way that we live our lives, right? Both physically and digitally. So we find the majority of our customers that transact in our stores have actually been to our website or one of our apps first, and they're browsing and they're preparing for their visit. Some people like to sort of go online, then go into store, and then transact online. Some people just want to be online. We're just going to create sort of solving customer challenges. And what we mean by that is, if some people prefer to go in store because they want to try on glasses, we're going to keep opening up stores to make it easier for them. But then we're also going to develop technologies like our virtual try-on, which was the first true-to-scale virtual try-on. Helping people try on glasses at home through their iPhone is a lot more challenging than, trying on a lipstick, for example, because you're putting on a third-party object that needs to fit perfectly. So we use machine learning and AI to figure out, the shape and the size of someone's head to identify their nose bridge. So, these virtual renditions of our frames, right, are positioned properly on their face as somebody would do in real life. Now, recently, we had launched that several years ago, but we've recently launched a new feature that we call Glasses Eraser because we heard from some of our customers that they would want to use our virtual try-on, but they were already wearing a pair of glasses and they needed their glasses in order to see. So now what we can do is actually erase the glasses they're physically wearing and enable them to virtually try on our frames through our app.
We probably have a lot of other questions we could ask you. I want to just ask you one last question, which is a little bit of a pivot from talking specifically about Warby Parker and the growth strategy. But I'm curious how your leadership style has evolved, because obviously, as you described, you went from being a somewhat reluctant entrepreneur in business school to now leading this vast, increasingly complex organization. I'm just curious for some of our listeners what you may have learned, if there are any lessons you think are useful to folks that might be listening.
Sure. So we have about 4,000 team members, and these team members have all different roles and backgrounds, from UX UI designers and software engineers to merchants at headquarters to retail associates to opticians to optometrists in some of our stores, to CX and customer service associates on our CX team, to folks working on production lines at our 2 manufacturing facilities. Our philosophy is that everyone's motivated by having positive impact, whether that's, motivated to earn a livelihood, to positively impact, their immediate family, or they want to have impact more broadly in the world. And for us to engage our team members, we need to communicate constantly. We need to tell them not just what we're doing, but how and why. So Dave and I, my co-founder and continues to be my co-CEO, every Wednesday morning, we still have an all hands. And we do that here at headquarters. We then record a 5-minute version. So that way all of our store teams and our manufacturing teams can hear it, so they understand what's going on throughout the company. And we celebrate, big milestones together. So when we hit the fact that we had distributed 15 million pairs of glasses to people in need around the world, that was a big internal celebration and motivates folks to continue to work really hard and drive and build the company.
Well, what a story, Neil. Congratulations on everything you and the team have accomplished. And thanks so much for joining us and for joining Steve and I on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. A real treat. We've been, we started this podcast during the COVID, and we initially drew up a list of who we'd love to talk to, and you were very close to that top of the list. So we're really thrilled to get you on the mic and hear more about the story and also about where it's going to evolve, because that's just a really interesting perspective. So listen, thanks again for making the time to chat with us, and wish you continued success and a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Steve, I was struck by the similarities between Neil and our interview with James Reinhart, CEO, founder of Threada. Both started with a globalist orientation. Both connected their personal passions with their professional. Now, we've talked about wobbly unicorns. In fact, of course, we have a wobbly unicorn segment on the show. We've talked about them quite a lot. What, in your mind, makes Warby Parker fundamentally different from the comings and goings in that category?
Well, first of all, I should say in kind of the broadest context that Warby Parker has not achieved GAAP profitability yet. So in some respects, they look like some of the disruptors, DNVBs we've talked about, and their stock has taken a pretty significant hit. But relatively speaking, they have done much better than almost all of them. First of all, I think it's just a fundamentally better business model. They have a much larger total addressable market than, say, an Allbirds or some of these other companies would have. I think they've really worked really hard on their differentiation from the branding side and from the integration of physical and digital, which is much better than their big competitors. And frankly, to the degree you believe that demographics is destiny, it's just a younger, more modern brand. If you look at VisionWorks, LensCrafters, Pearl, I mean, they just seem like very, very old brands. So I think there's a lot of things that work in their favor. They moved very early on aggressive store growth and did it, though, in a pretty rigorous, disciplined fashion. So they're going to be crossing the 300 store threshold sometime next year. So that's much more than any of these other guys.
Yeah.
I think they also started to focus more on, they've done a very nice job with growth, but not trying to get this massive hockey stick growth. And they did make the pivot to more profitability a bit faster than some of the other companies we've talked about quite a bit more. So, if you just compare just quickly to some of the other brands that got kind of similar press early on, similar kinds of investment, and were sort of part of this, the early darlings of this wave of disruption, you do have Allbirds and Rent the Runway, which have pretty much been train wrecks. Not to say that they can't figure out how to get back on track, but they had multi-billion-dollar valuations. Now both of them are worth under $100 million. Stitch Fix reported last week, they got a lot of press about their business model early on, still big losses. Their stock's down like 85% in the past 5 years. So they might be doing a little bit better than some, but still have a long way to go. The Real is maybe the brand kind of in this category that's maybe a little bit closer to Warby Parker, but still a pretty big gap. They've actually been able to get their sales growth started again, though pretty modestly, and their stock has rebounded this year. But it had dropped over 90% in the last year. So, yeah, I think Warby Parker is really well managed as far as I can tell, and they've done a lot of things right, and they just happen to be in a space where I think they have a meaningful advantage, where some other ones are just kind of interesting, but really don't have the capacity to be a true unicorn, most likely. And I will say, in the spirit of our wildly unicorn language, Warby Parker's market valuation, which is not the only measure of success, but it is close to $2 billion. So they are very solidly in the unicorn category. And I think Neil did a great job articulating how they got there and what they're going to do to stay there.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 9 will be available each and every Tuesday, so be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us. If you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategic advisor, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of 2 books, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, and Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant and advisor, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.